let's get started.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much, Claire, and everyone for being here today. We're super excited to be talking about sustainable supply chains with us, Renewal Mill, and the 150-year-old chocolate company, Guittard Chocolate. So my name is Caroline. I'm the COO and co-founder of Renewal Mill, and you just met Claire and Amy, and we've just brought Alice into the room, so perfect timing. When we think about Earth Day and the environment, I think people sometimes forget how much of an impact our food system has on the environment and how much sustainable sourcing can be used to drive positive environmental change. So for example, in our case here at Renewal Mill, we're working in the food waste space. So if food waste were a country, it would be the third largest emitter of greenhouse gases behind only China and the US. And according to leading research from Project Drawdown, reducing food waste is actually the #1 thing we can do to prevent 2 degrees of climate warming in the immediate term. But you're probably not thinking about food waste every time you eat some delicious tofu or a bar of chocolate, even though both of these ingredients do contribute to the more than 130 billion pounds of food waste that occurred last year. But we're going to get into that. Today, we're also joined, as we said, by Alice Medrich, who's a 5 times James Beard award-winning cookbook author and chocolate and alternative flour expert. Among her early accomplishments, Alice is actually credited with popularizing the chocolate truffle in the US and introducing the larger American chocolate truffle, which is obviously now a mainstream convection and popular favorite. She's also a longtime user and fan of Guittard chocolate, and she now leads product development for us here at Renewal Mill. So today, Alice is going to lead us through a brief bake-along using ingredients from both Renewal Mill and Guittard. So if you purchased a brownie kit for this event, you'll want to get it out now. And then Alice is going to walk you through the process so that you can have delicious brownies baking while we continue the rest of the chat. So I'll turn it over to Alice.
Oops. I need to be able to share the screen, Claire, and it no longer allows that. Yes, it does. Okay, goody. All right. So just 2 things before I get started here. Nobody needs a chef to show them how to use a mix, but I'm going to do it anyway because we're going to use this mix as an introduction to how delicious something can be with an upcycled product in it. And also we're going to take the mix and do some extravagantly decadent fun things with it by adding toppings. But I just wanted to add also that I think that part of the success going forward of upcycled products of all kinds is the extent to which chefs and people with baking and cooking skills can make delicious products and delicious things at home, and delicious things, commercial products with it. So this is a way of introducing it, and I hope that if you're a chef out there or if you're a home baker, that upcycled will be something on your radar going forward. So preheat your oven to 350 if you're baking along with us, and even if you ate all the delicious toppings that came with the brownie mix, that's okay, you still have the mix. The bag tells you what to do, but I'm going to give you a little bit of extra value, you know, maybe chef's tips, you could call them. Instead of greasing the pan, which I hate to do because it's always so messy, I'm going to take my pan and I'm going to line it with foil. Now, if you've not done this before, you probably think you need to take this piece of foil and like push it in there, and you know that it's going to tear and break and be a pain in the neck. So here's trick #1. I do it with every brownie I make, every bar I make. And if you play your cards right, you'll never have to wash another brownie pan. This one hasn't been washed in decades. So you wrap the foil around the pan like a package, and then just slide it in there. And if you can manage to get your batter in that pan without slopping over the edges, as I said, you'll never wash your brownie pan again. So that's that about that. So now let's go on to the mix. We're going to come to the toppings. You also received in your package some lovely toppings. I hope you haven't eaten them yet. We'll get to that later. The brownie mix goes into the bowl just like it says on the back. And then we're going to add some measured out oil. And it's, I think, a ½ cup plus 2 tablespoons. And we'll talk about the oil in a minute. And some hot tap water. And that's really all that goes in here. And this is all you need for this delicious brownie, but we're just going to take it a little bit further than that. So as soon as all the wet and dry stuff is mixed together, this mix asks you to mix for another minute, just to get that fudgy quality in here and to start dissolving the sugar. It's organic sugar. This can be a vegan product. It's organic sugar, and the particle sizes are a little bit bigger, and it's nice to do a little extra mixing to get dissolved. At least that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. So while I'm giving this a few extra strokes of mixing, let's just talk about the oil. Use anything that you use in your kitchen, oil that you like that is neutral flavor. And that can be a vegetable oil or a soy oil, but it also could be a seed oil. I particularly like a cold pressed, either sunflower or grapeseed oil. We're doing grapeseed today. Some of you, like me, may be huge olive oil fans. I don't use olive oil in this product. I just want the chocolate to be the star. This happens to be like superb Guittard natural cocoa powder in here as an ingredient. So after this is mixed for about a minute, you can see it's gotten quite fudgy. And I'm gonna slip it into a lined pan. And pastry chef's best friend, good for home bakers too, not that expensive, is a little offset spatula that allows you to spread something without getting your wrist into the pan as well. So we're gonna spread this evenly. So easy with this spatula. And instead of baking it for the full 40 to 45 minutes time, we're going to bake it for only 30 of those minutes. So we're going to be doing that. That will go into the oven. And while it's in the oven, we get to prepare the toppings. As I said, you've got a bag of marshmallows, lovely walnut halves, and fabulous Guittard chocolate chips. So what I did was I emptied the bag and I separated the nuts and the chocolates, and go through and break up the biggest pieces of nuts. So I went through and I broke up all the walnut halves. You might wonder why we sent you these beautiful halves if we're just going to break them. And maybe we should have just sent you chopped up nuts. But chef tip number 2 is when you're buying nuts, buy the biggest pieces you can find because they'll be the freshest. And obviously you want to buy, you know, nuts from a store that's turning them over pretty quickly. But if you buy already chopped nuts, they're already going to be on their way to being stale. So I always buy big nuts, even if I'm going to be chopping them or breaking them. In this case, we want pretty big pieces. So those halves can just be broken in half or 3 pieces. And then you're going to also notice that I've taken all the lovely big marshmallows and gone and cut them in quarters. And I've done that with an oiled knife like this. So I'll show you 2 of them. And now you're wondering why we didn't send you some already miniaturized marshmallows. And I'm going to tell you that the big marshmallows taste better and they melt in a more decadent and beautiful way. And the whole experience is just better with the big marshmallows. So go ahead and take the minute it takes to cut them into quarters. Also, if you do this in advance, you'll notice that I kept them all, socially distant from each other, because once they're cut, they're quite sticky and they want to get back together and stay there. And you actually don't want that to happen. So, so then retrieving here's a pan of brownies that has been baked only 30 minutes, and we're leaving the oven on. And we're going to start out by sprinkling all of these marshmallow pieces on there. There's an order to this. Pastry chefs are known for being extremely fuss budgety. And so there's a reason that the marshmallow pieces are going on first, and that is because everything that touches them will melt and become stuck together, which is what we want. So the marshmallows go first, and there's spaces between them. That's exactly right. You can all see what I'm doing. And yes, the brownies are still hot from the oven. And then the next order of business is these nice big broken pieces of gorgeous walnuts, gorgeous fresh walnuts. And remember, the marshmallows are gonna melt and swell a little bit and grab onto the nuts. And finally, a really generous amount of chocolate chips. Any of the Guittard chips would be good for this. If you prefer milk chocolate chips, go for the milk. There's several darks to choose from. Okay, so that all goes on. And you can see, we can see all of the ingredients, and every one of those ingredients has a little bit of contact with the sticky marshmallow. So that's all, the marshmallows, the glue, and all of this is going to work out well. This goes back in the oven for about 10 or 15 minutes to finish cooking, and also to melt the marshmallows and maybe get a little color on them and to glue all the pieces on there. So when it comes out, it's going to look a little something like this, all melty. And then I think I have a couple minutes, do I not, to just go so far as to show you why I used the foil liner and how to get them out of the pan. And then I'm going to turn it back over to Claire and Amy. Just a second here. Okay. So once the brownies are out of the oven, they cool in the pan. I don't like to try to get them out while they're still hot and soft. And then I can, rather than just lifting up on the foil, which might sort of buckle the brownies in the middle, I kind of like finesse it out. I kind of like tilt it out and slide it. And really that's all there is to it. One other little thing, you may find, as I did, that my marshmallows want to stick to the foil around the edges. And you can either grease the foil before you start, or you can take a pair of scissors and just cut it loose, which is what I did beforehand. So no panicking about sticking. Unfold foil. I'm not going to show you all the way, but if you have another spatula that you can slide in between the foil, and wait till the brownies are cool before you do this. Otherwise you'll have a lot of mushy stuff going on. You can slide underneath the foil to loosen them on all sides, and then cut with a big knife. Answer any questions along the way or in the Q&A afterwards. Thank you.
You are the main event, Alice. That was awesome.
Thank you. Now, oops. Okay.
Okay, so thank you so much, Alice. Hopefully everybody has their brownies in the oven. And thanks to the 50 of you who have joined us here today. We're super excited. Please feel free at any time to drop your questions into the Q&A function, and we'll either answer them live or we'll type answers and help out that way. But now we're going to turn it over to Claire and Amy for a fireside chat. So Claire, take it away.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Well, I'm so excited to be here with Amy today to be talking about using supply chains to drive positive impact. So I thought that, since we just watched decadent brownies being baked, let's start with talking about what it looks like to source cacao. So could you walk us through the basics of the chocolate supply chain?
Yes, I can do my darndest. It's a extremely complex supply chain, and I think it's really important for everyone to have a little bit of a sense of it. And I think over the last few years, it's become more and more prevalent and part of lots of conversations. So I think more today, folks are maybe more familiar with the supply chain than if I may say ever before. But it is really complex. So I'll try and allude to as much of it as I can, given the short period of time that we have to talk through it. But as mentioned earlier, we're a 150-year-old family business, and and really central to what we do and how we do it is predicated on family tradition and multi-generational sort of formulas and approaches that we take. And a lot of that also has to do with multi-generational relationships to cacao and farmers in general. And that concept of traditions and flavors and celebrating each of those is really central to our sourcing process as well. So before I kind of get into that, just to give basics of where cocoa grows and how it grows more or less 10 to 15 degrees either side of the equator. So we refer to that as the cocoa belt. So just imagine sort of a band around the center of the globe, and that encompasses countries such as Ghana, Ivory Coast, Madagascar, Tanzania, Colombia, Peru, Venezuela, Ecuador, Indonesia. Hawaii is actually the northernmost region within the US where cocoa can grow. So we make a single origin Hawaii, which would technically be an entirely US made and grown cocoa, which is rare. But I digress slightly. But each of the regions that grow cocoa have different traditions and styles. There are a few things that are consistent sort of across the board, regardless of where it grows. So there's 3 primary varietals to cocoa with sub varietals underneath those. There's Criollo, Forastero, and Trinitario. And I liken that to sort of apples. If you can think about it that way, you've got a Granny Smith apple, you've got a Braeburn, you have Honey Crisp, you have Fuji. All those apples look slightly different. They have got different types of skins, slightly thicker, some are thinner. The inside, some might have more juice than others. Some might taste a little bit more sour. Cocoa's the same way. So different regions grow different cocoa beans, but they all grow on a tree. So you may have heard the fun fact that if you're eating chocolate, you're technically eating a fruit, which is true, although you're eating the seeds. So the pod grows on the tree. They're harvested usually with a machete. They're cut off the tree. They take about 140 to 160 days to ripen. Once they're ready to get harvested, you crack the pod open, and each pod has a number of seeds inside, and they're covered with a mucilage. And that mucilage is used to ferment the beans, which is the next stage once you've harvested the cocoa. Cocoa technically has 2 main crops in a year. There's a September to January crop, and then there's a June to August, and they're referred to as mid crop and main crop. And that's sort of a rough estimate. It changes based on the location. Once they're harvested, they get fermented, and different countries ferment in different ways. So oftentimes in West Africa, again, this is not always the case, but you might see heap fermentation. So they'll pull the beans from the pods and they'll put them in big piles on top of banana leaves and let the juices flow from the banana leaf and drain. And then they'll sort of ferment the beans that way. In South America, you often find box fermentation. So it's cascading boxes. There's typically 3 of them. And as they work their way through the fermentation stages, they work their way, gravity pulls it down through the different boxes. And it sort of develops flavor. There's lots of flavor development that happens during the fermentation stage. And once it's done fermenting, it then goes to drying. And the preferred way of drying is on drying beds. Obviously, that's not always the possible case for a lot of small shareholders. So the beans get dried, and that's when we get them. So we taste all beans before we accept them to make chocolate from them. We oftentimes purchase beans through directly from farmers. We oftentimes buy through traders. Again, it just depends on the infrastructure in each country. It's totally different. Some countries are co-op models, some are more small shareholders. So the supply chain, as I said, is incredibly complicated. But the main point that I wanted to get across was that a lot of flavor development happens on the farm and happens in collaboration with farmers. And so they're really celebrating that flavor and celebrating the traditions of what they've done. That allows us to make a chocolate that can then be celebrated in Alice's brownies or a chocolate cake or confections or whatnot. So that's my rapid.
No, that's great. I mean, I learned from that for sure. That's very cool. It's definitely a global supply chain.
I muted myself because my refrigerator is humming. So I guess I have a question for you. If you could go
Yeah.
through sort of just sort of the definition of upcycled food and why they are considered more sustainable. I think that's interesting.
Yeah, for sure. And we actually had a couple questions come in asking exactly that. So maybe we should have started with a quick definition of what we mean by upcycled. So so thank you for asking that. So upcycled food is really, it's food that would otherwise have gone to waste, that you're uplifting to its highest use, which is being used to feed people. So in the case of Renewal Mill, we're looking at byproducts that are coming out of food manufacturing that would otherwise go to waste, either landfill, compost, sometimes animal agriculture, and using them to create food for people. So our flagship ingredient is okara flour, which is what's in your brownie mixes if you have a kit. And that is a flour that's made from the soybean pulp that's left behind when soy milk is made. So we take that pulp, which again, this concept of upcycled, that would have otherwise gone out the door as a waste product, but it's super nutrient dense. It has a lot of amazing properties. It has a lot of demonstrated health benefits with it. So we think it's an amazing food and we want to have people be eating it. So we dehydrate it and mill it and turn it into this delicious upcycled flour. And the benefits of these upcycled products are really because we're now using all of what we grew in the ground instead of just using some of it. So you know, what I really find to be a pretty striking statistic from at least the okara production is that for a tofu, so we work with a tofu factory because soy milk is the precursor to tofu. They take about, of all the soybeans that arrive at the door of the facility, about 40% of that soybean mass makes it into the tofu that leaves the factory. And 60% would have gone to waste. Now, if you have an upcycling solution like Renewal Mill that's taking that okara, turning it into flour, turning it into these other food products, now we've used 100% of that soybean mass. So we're actually using all of the soybeans that were there. And in turn, we're making sure that all of the resources that went into growing those soybeans, like the land and the energy and the water that we used, are all being put to use to create nutrition for people to eat. So that's where a lot of the benefit comes from. And that's why we consider them to be sustainable, because it's basically allowing us to think holistically about the inputs that go into our food system. And I should note that while this is kind of a trending word and a new food category, it's actually obviously a very old concept. So, you know, certainly the closer you were to your own food production, the more you would have, you know, quote unquote, upcycled, or, you know, made sure that you were using everything that you started with because you were closer to the process of paying for it. So there actually is, because soy milk was something that has been made in someone's home for hundreds of years in East Asia, there's actually a rich culinary history already with okara, not in the West, but in places where they would have produced okara in their home in that process of making soy milk. They would also have used the okara. So so there's a lot of examples that we can look to in history of where this happened. And so the innovation now is really just finding ways that we can take those traditional concepts and apply them, you know, at scale to food manufacturing the way it exists now today. Yeah, so I know one of the taglines, turning it back to the chocolate supply chains. I know one of your taglines is cultivate better at Guittard. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about what this means and how this impacts how you guys think about sourcing.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the question. I think one of the things that gets me super jazzed and excited is just hearing you guys talk about, you know, upcycling food. And, you know, every time we talk, I'm always like inspired by everything that you guys are doing. And the big thing that I think is the common theme is this collaboration. Like, you can't do what you do without sort of connecting with folks and seeing what, you know, their byproducts are and how you can upcycle it in unique ways. And collaboration is a word that we oftentimes use at Guittard, and cultivate better is really predicated on that concept, which is this idea that sustainability is a constant journey and that it's not just sort of a one-stop shop and you've got something in mind and you make it happen. It really is about sort of reflecting and going through the sustainable journey, as cliche and overused as the term is. But it really is about trying to continually ask yourself the question of how can you cultivate better? How can I do this differently? How can I do better in everything that I do? And it impacts everything from our sourcing to our product development, with collaboration really as a central tenet. So we launched this concept of cultivate better sort of formally several years ago, and it's all encompassing. It includes, as I said, a lot of what we do at Origin. We've got 3 flavor labs that we have established in collaboration with local governments and their research institutes. So we've got one in Indonesia with ICRI, the Indonesian Cocoa and Coffee Research Institute. We've got one in Ghana with CRIG, which is the Cocoa Research Institute of Ghana. And then we've got one in Ivory Coast, which is the CCC, the Conseil de Café y Cacao, which is their coffee and cocoa research institute. And it's really done in collaboration with these research institutes, where we're encouraging them and working with them to protect the unique and diverse flavors of their countries. So it's not just about high yields and disease resistance, which you oftentimes find with food crops, but it's also, taking into account flavor. We don't want the same thing to happen to cocoa as what happened with heirloom tomatoes, for instance. So it's really, the concept is around improving yields without compromising flavor. So that's sort of one element of Cultivate Better, where you sort of have this idea of this journey of cultivating better with planting material. Field training is another thing where what we do, again, in collaboration with research institutes and some of our on the ground partners, where we're training around pruning and proper drying. And then we have longstanding relationships with the Heirloom Cacao Preservation Initiative, which again is around celebrating flavor. That is what farmers are cultivating. And then we've got certifications, and Cultivate Better also includes what we do sort of domestically, if you will. So we just installed some solar panels on our facility in Fairfield. And then we also just transitioned, this is a huge thing, we just launched 2 new baking items on the baking chip aisle, and the film that the chips are in, we have a 24% post-consumer recycled film material. So we did a big LCA and tried to understand sort of what was the best way forward to try and create a film that was somewhat sustainable. We looked at, compostable and all sorts of stuff, and PCR was really the thing that made the most sense, which I guess is kind of an upcycled element. So that's sort of Cultivate Better. And then another arm of Cultivate Better is a Cultivate Better Cocoa, which is really focused within our supply chain. It's a premium-based supply chain innovation program that's focused within 3 origins, and it's sort of really predicated on the interconnectedness between premiums for farmers, secondary income streams, and then environmental preservation. So I could go on and on talking about this stuff, and I'm sure we have a lot of questions from folks coming in. So I'm happy to answer any additional questions, but that's a little bit about Cultivate Better and sort of the concept of collaboration and where it overlaps with some of the stuff that you do. And speaking of some of the stuff that you do, I just wanted to ask a question sort of about your impact, which within the cocoa supply chain, given what I talked about earlier, how nuanced and complex it is, it's really difficult to capture your impact based on what you do. And I'd love to learn a little bit about what you guys do in terms of your impact and the scale of it and how you measure it, because I think it's really
yeah, for sure. It's definitely easier. I mean, our supply chains are much less complex than chocolate. But just to kind of tie back to what you were talking about the sustainability journey under Cultivate Better, I think that's something that really resonates with us as well, because even though the core of our business, I mean, as we're producing these upcycled ingredients, there's an environmental benefit, and I can kind of talk about how we quantify that. We really want to make sure that we're infusing that sustainability ethos into everything we're doing. So we want it to be informing all of our decisions. And so I know one of the questions that came in was along the lines of single-use plastic, which was one of the biggest challenges that we faced early on, was that we had this awesome, better for the environment ingredient, and the kind of the best packaging that we could use for it is single-use plastic, which is a juxtaposition there that really doesn't make any sense. And so for an interim measure, for the biggest challenge for us is that the compostable materials have a shelf life that is shorter than the shelf life of a baking mix or of a flour. And so we are running the risk of having product that, we're running the risk of not protecting our product for the length of time that it can be used. So as an interim measure, and we fully recognize that this is an interim measure because we want to be moving towards having, having better packaging. And it was great to hear about what Guittard is doing. We have actually become certified with a group called Repurpose Global to be plastic negative. So we are essentially offsetting our plastic use by having twice the amount of plastic pulled out of the environment with a project that we are sponsoring than the plastic that we put in. So not like an end solution to it, because certainly we want to get rid of single-use plastics altogether at some point. But while we're kind of waiting for better innovation in packaging, that's kind of like how we've thought about, having a better option there. So in terms of how we measure like the actual impact of the ingredients themselves, the most obvious thing that we are tracking is how many pounds of food waste we are diverting back into the food supply chain that would have otherwise gone to waste. And we were really proud and excited to hit that 100,000 pound threshold in December of 2020. And it really was a moment for us to kind of step back and be like, this is great. We're actually, making an impact. This is actually doing what we were, set out to do. And with that, of course, is also monitoring and measuring what the greenhouse gas emission reduction is from utilizing these upcycled ingredients. So, our life cycle of that flour starts when the pulp leaves the soy milk machine or leaves the oat milk machine. So we essentially get to, remove the whole growing phase, which is calculated with, what the original use of the product was for, what those soybeans were for. In the case of okara, it would be the tofu. So, and that's a pretty intensive piece of the pretty intensive part of the life cycle of a food is that growing phase. Can be about like 50% of the carbon footprint. So removing that means that we have an ingredient with a much smaller carbon footprint. So we can measure, depending on what it's replacing in a formulation or in a food product, we can understand what that benefit is in utilizing it. And then we also monitor what actually is the carbon footprint of these flours, because there is some still carbon footprint from the production process. And we also measure it for our products. We just completed a project with another company called Planet Forward, which allows us to look at the carbon footprint of our brownie mix. And we offset those emissions so that we can have carbon neutral flours and carbon neutral baking mixes. Yeah, so a lot to measure, but it's definitely not as challenging as a very complex web of the chocolate supply chain.
I find it interesting that you don't have to include the growing phase in your carbon footprinting. Like, I think that's crazy. I mean, yeah, a good thing.
Right. Yeah, it totally is. I mean, it's basically, I mean, that is like the key benefit of upcycled, right? It's like you were still going to make this tofu, so those emissions, get counted by you, right. And we get to start with just the part at which it's produced and would otherwise have gone to waste.
Yeah, otherwise it would be considered double counting.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah, I know. So I'm kind of curious how you we've talked about so much, and you're right, there's just so much there to share with people. So, and your role is marketing. How do you communicate with Guittard customers and chocolate connoisseurs about your supply chains and about what you're doing with like chocolate?
Yeah, we are not and it seems strange for me to say this as the director of marketing, but we're not great about talking about the things that we do. And so, we are, I'm the 5th generation where, we really relationships is huge. And so we really do have a lot of one-on-one conversations, believe it or not, where it's about really understanding sort of the landscape and what our customers need and what they're looking for. I think a lot of people, we are the bag that Alice was baking from today, that's a consumer product that you can purchase in the store, but most of our business is B2B. So we sell ingredients into companies like yourselves, confectioners, restaurateurs, all sorts of stuff. So we're a little bit more behind the scenes. So we don't necessarily have a tremendous platform to be able to talk to consumers about the importance of making certain decisions when you make purchases and what you choose. And so we need to rely on our customers to be able to be that catalyst and the conduit. The Cultivate Better Cocoa program is intended to sort of be a platform where those conversations can start. And a lot of it is around conversation and really understanding the nuances and the complexities, because there is so much there. And I think a lot of folks think that there are quick and easy things that can be done to make sure that you're making purchases that are sustainable, which there are, but the trickle down effect of certain things is a real issue. And so it's understanding sort of the complexities and how we are all, can make decisions that can impact the system. It might not be a quick and easy fix, but I think as you all have pointed out, it is about sort of long-term investments. And, obviously we all realize that we're in quite a dire situation with climate change, but making small decisions and making small change, in little parts of your life really does have an impact. So I didn't really answer the question fully, other than dialogue and really having a conversation around that. Go ahead, Alice.
So let me add to this, because it relates to renewal as well as to you, Amy. One of the ways that you reach out is the customer service, which is unparalleled in your industry, actually. And since I'm the sort of one-person R&D department at Renewal, in the back of my head, when we talk to a customer, a current customer, or somebody we want to be a customer, I'm always thinking about your model for helping that customer solve problems, helping that customer use the product, even to the extent where your people have gone into plants, customers' plants, and helped them design a new product or fix a product or improve a product. And in our tiny way, very tiny so far way, that's what we're trying to do. I mean, we've actually created product for customers that are growing as users. And that's sort of one of the ways that a new unknown product like this can be sold.
Well, I think you raise, again, it comes back to that concept of collaboration and working together. And, the idea that we really hold on to at Guittard, which is the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And, working together to figure out the best solutions. And that involves for us working with cocoa farmers and co-ops and customers, and you guys hopping into a tofu factory and figuring out how you can repurpose something. I think it's a really important piece of doing good business and cultivating better, to be cliche. But yeah, so kind of in the same vein, Claire, I'd love to sort of understand how you introduce people to this concept of upcycled food. It is relatively new, and I think it's easy for people to maybe assume that it's a trend, but it's probably a really good trend, and one that I think will probably, it's amazing. And how you market sort of this novel concept to consumers, I'd love to sort of understand that.
Yeah, totally. So it's been an interesting process, actually. So I started Renewal Mill about 5 years ago. And at the time, actually, talking about food waste, I kind of had to start at the beginning and talk about, these statistics around how much we're actually wasting, and like 30 to 40% of the food that we produce goes to waste. And some of the greenhouse gas emission statistic that Caroline mentioned at the beginning. And then work from there to and now we can do this upcycle thing. And there's been so much education over the past 5 years around the fact that food waste is a problem, that most people already come to the table with some understanding of that. And it's now kind of transitioned to the point of people sort of wondering, okay, so what do I do about it? Like, it's something I'm concerned about, and how do I do something with, about this? And that's what we've kind of been focused on. And that was actually the kind of what we were thinking about behind the name of Renewal Mill, was that we wanted to really tap into this idea of optimism and hope, and this sense that like you can make choices that do something about this, and they should be easy to do and delicious to do, and so kind of empowering people to feel like they can be a part of the solution. And also I would say, like, at the beginning, I think we were a little concerned about the idea of talking about waste, that something would otherwise have gone to waste, and this is food, and do people really want to hear that? And like, kind of going back to what I said, I think the education around it has happened faster than I could have imagined. And it really isn't people are not seeing this. Generally, what we're finding is that people aren't seeing this as a problem. And in fact, we're seeing just a huge movement towards people that are, interested in sustainability claims on their food. We've done some of our own survey work that has shown that. And sort of surprised us that sustainability claims were just like neck and neck with organic when it came to what people said is driving their purchasing behavior. I mean, this is obviously like stated opinion on surveys. It's not necessarily revealed behavior, but I think it spoke to how much people are thinking about it, right? And so we definitely are kind of wanting to tap into that and make sure that we're very forward about the sustainability piece of what we're doing. We also want to lead with taste. We want to have a beautiful picture on our bag that makes people want to have this brownie and have this cookie. But we also say right there on the front of the bag, like, fights climate change, because that's really the underlying mission of what we're doing. So we want to tie that in as well. So it's, it's taste, it's better nutrition with these upcycled ingredients. And you're doing something better for the planet. So yeah, and I think we are seeing that it's definitely a trend. We've seen upcycled food be listed in some of the top 10 trend lists coming out of like Whole Foods and Food Network magazine, and even some like outside studies that have been done looking at how many consumers are aiming to purchase upcycled food. And to really help grow this whole kind of like nascent food piece of the food industry too, we co-founded the Upcycled Food Association, which is a new trade organization in 2019. Caroline is serving as the inaugural board president of that group. And it's grown from, I think there were like 6 founding members, and now there's over, I think it's close to 200 members of the group. So it's definitely, and just to also tie into this theme that we've had tonight on collaboration, we have absolutely seen that, a rising tide lifts all boats. So even though we're all in this upcycled food space, it's like, it makes so much more sense for us to be working together and be like cultivating and really growing this industry all together, and using our collective voice to talk to people about what upcycled means. And in fact, part of the work that the UFA is doing is coming up with a certification for upcycled, so that there's some like trust and understanding that there's an actual quantifiable benefit behind this product that claims to be upcycled.
That's great. Do you guys have, like, is there a, I'm asking us selfishly jumping in here and not adding it to the Q&A. Is there more of a uptick of upcycled foods in other countries, or is the US sort of leading the charge in that? I'm just curious.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I mean, I think it's interesting because it's sort of like the way that our food, kind of the way industrialized food system has developed, particularly in the West, it's like created this need to have upcycle to be like a better system. So in some places it's like never left like the ability to think more holistically about the inputs. But in terms of kind of fixing systems to be, kind of go back to be more traditional, and in that way be more efficient and be more sustainable. Yeah, I do think that, like, certainly when it comes to like the certification, the US is going to be kind of the start of that. And I think, Caroline, feel free to jump in if I'm giving misinformation here, but then with plans to expand globally as well, because it's definitely something that's being, people are interested in and thinking about all over.
Yeah, the Upcycled Food Association already has members from Australia, Canada, Europe. So there's definitely a contingent there. I think the challenge, and the certification is actually rolling out globally already, but the challenge is that in some other countries, they don't have a word for upcycled food. So we've done some work in Italy where they're trying to convey the idea that they're using upcycled ingredients and there's no translation. So they're like circular cookie, and people are not quite understanding what that means. So they're trying to do some testing and from a marketing perspective, understand what is the best way to translate this concept. But the idea with the certification was to create a seal that could be used globally and have a global understanding.
Wow. Good for you guys. That's awesome.
Yeah. Well, I hope everybody's house is smelling amazing and delicious with your brownies in the oven and close to coming out. I think in the last few minutes here, we're going to open it up to Q&A. I think we have one question. Claire, you kind of touched on it, but maybe you can share a little bit more about the origin story of Renewal Mill.
Yeah, totally. So I previously co-founded a juice company in Boston. So that was my first kind of seeing byproducts, all the fruit and vegetable pulp that was left over after a day of making juice. And, you know, I really loved that business. It was a really fun venture, but it was always, it was just always something that really bothered me at the end of the day when we were having to throw out all this stuff. And there were kind of two pieces that were a challenge there. The first was that, you know, we were paying quite a bit for this organic and mostly local produce. So we were really, the intent was to be supporting a lot of New England farmers. And then we would use like a little piece of it, right? Like the juice from the carrot, and then like the rest of it would be waste. So juice is expensive. And so we were like wasting product and then selling what we were making at a pretty high price point. So it wasn't even really super accessible nutrition. So it was kind of that problem that was really rattling around in my brain. And then I just had a very fortuitous meeting with the owner of Cotto Foods, which is our first partner facility where we're sourcing the okara. It's kind of nerdy, but like we totally bonded over byproducts. So I was talking about juice byproducts and he was talking about his soybean pulp. And what really struck me as quite interesting with his challenge was just the scale that he was at. So, you know, it was we had enough that it was still troubling and obnoxious, but it wasn't quite enough that we could kind of solve it by itself. But he's got 40 to 50 tons that he's producing every week. So we're talking like, you know, truckloads that need to be removed every day. So that was definitely the moment where I thought, oh gosh, this is an incredible source of raw material that's all just sitting here all together already. It's already aggregated. We've got this great source that we can use. So that was the beginning. And then of course, realizing, you know, it's not a juice problem. It's not just an okara problem. We see this all over the place where it's usually in those first few steps of processing that we, you know, pop off the potato peels for French fries or we're juicing and that pulp is left over, where there's a lot of opportunities for seeing these byproducts as raw materials to use.
Awesome. Okay, Alice, we have a question for you on baking with okara flour. Can you talk a little bit about what that's like? We explained that it's a little similar to coconut flour, but I think some folks are worried that coconut flour is a little bit drying. So would love to hear your perspective. Oh, it looks like you're on mute.
Rookie mistake that never goes away. Okara flour is high in fiber, somewhat similar to coconut flour, but it's a little easier to use. But it does mean that if you substitute it for any other flour, you use less of it by weight. It substitutes maybe equal by volume, but less by weight. And sometimes you do have to add a little bit more liquid, but it's not nearly as severe an outcome as coconut flour. So on our package, we give a little bit of guidance, and for anybody who's, you know, deeply wanting to get details on this, we can send you a whole little, practically a diary of my first couple of years working with it, where it gives you, you know, sort of ways to deal with cookies, ways to deal with flatbreads, ways to deal with cupcakes, muffins, that sort of thing. And so that's been our way of talking to other chefs and food producers, is giving people a head start so that you don't go to a chef and expect him or her to spend countless hours with a new ingredient that they know nothing about. So yeah, easier than coconut flour. And check the back of the bag and we'll send you out more material if you like.
Yeah, definitely. We can send out that guide in the follow-up email to this event. I think we have time for one or two more questions. Alice, Claire, we have a question here about who converts the excess soy byproduct into flour. So I think that's us, but maybe talking a little bit more about the co-location model.
Yeah. So we do it. It's our equipment that is it's like our installation, our equipment that's at the facility. So like the tofu factory that's producing the byproduct, and that just helps us with food safety. So we're just, we're processing it right there. So within hours of it coming out of the soy milk machine. And then also, since dehydration is a main part of it, it removes that water weight so that when we do ship it, it's cheaper. So we definitely, kind of wanted to keep all of those cost saving benefits of utilizing upcycled ingredients so that we could have this be more of a source of mainstream nutrition and not have to have it be like premium priced.
Okay, well, we have maybe time. I don't know, there's no other questions here. Oh, we have one more. Estelle is wondering if we have any plans to develop savory products with the okara flour.
I don't know, Claire, do we?
Yeah, I suppose tortilla kind of counts in that category.
That counts, definitely.
Yeah. So if you're familiar with the company Tia Lupita, they have a tortilla that they make that utilizes our upcycled okara flour, and I believe that they're soon going to be launching that product at Sprouts nationally. So if you want to look out for that, you can try that product developed by Alice. But yeah, there's definitely you can extrude it too, so you can make any, all your like puff products and cereals and things like that. Snacks can be made with it too, and of course you can flavor those however you want.
Crackers and chips are great uses for it. Flatbreads, any kind of snacky, salty, crunchy thing.
Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you guys all so much for being here today. I think we'll just end with a little bit of how to find us. So feel free to reach out to anyone on the Renewal Mill team at renewalmill.com or info@renewalmill, as also at Renewal Mill on any social media platform. Amy, if you want to tell people where to find Guittard.
Well, Guittard.com, and then Instagram is our most active social channel. That's just at Guittard Chocolate.
Awesome. And then Alice, Alice has a website, so you can find her at alicemedrich.com. We're also going to be sending out the link here in the chat to the brownie kit on our website. So if you want to make these brownies again or gift them to a friend, definitely check that out. And feel free to let us know how it went. We'd love to see photos or any reviews of the product. So we look forward to seeing those and hope everyone enjoys the rest of their evening with some delicious treats. And thanks again.